When people say this is the most important election of my lifetime, that's not a great thing to say in a democracy. No election should be the most important ever. And it's always concerning when each one is the most important and then it keeps on just going. How do we lower the stakes? And one way to lower the stakes is to think about how to have our politics less focused on the federal state. That there is more to life and hopefully more to politics than that. But that would require us to rethink state structures and bureaucracies and so forth. And I'm not talking here about limited government. I'm talking here more about empowering local government, local communities, increasing the autonomy that religious communities have over their own communities, so on and so forth. But that's probably discussion for another time. So strong states raise the stakes, and that is a problem. And what about liberalism? Because that's also what we have here in America and also throughout European democracies. We have modern liberalism, or what's sometimes referred to as late liberalism. And across the globe, electorates are revolting against liberal presumptions, including most recently in Italy and Sweden, where far-right parties made unprecedented gains. And there's a potential that for the first time in the post-war era, Italy will have a far-right prime minister. So clearly people are yearning for alternatives. They're not happy with the status quo. But then the question is, then what? It is one thing to oppose. That's always the first step. It's a necessary step. But what do the ideological alternatives actually look like in practice? Are they genuine alternatives, or do they simply superimpose superficial changes on this kind of unalterable foundation of the existing state? And just to give an example, I mean, sometimes when I've talked to Christian conservatives and even some Christian Catholic integralists, and I've asked them for more specificity on what their vision looks like in policy terms. And sometimes they'll say things like, okay, blue laws, in other words, Sunday laws where you don't have certain businesses open. You kind of encourage this idea of a day of rest. You kind of get back to this religious rhythm. Or dry counties, or reshaping public education so there's less anti-religious theories being introduced to students, whether it's on gay rights, transgender rights, and so forth. Now, all those are I should also say, and abortion restrictions as well. Those are all important things, but they're mostly about combating the excesses of liberal outreach. It isn't necessarily a new way of conceptualizing politics. With all of this said, I'm torn. I self-identify as a liberal, a classical liberal, who's also critical of liberalism, or at least critical of what it's become. I mean, I personally wouldn't want to live under a democratically elected Islamist government. I wouldn't want to live under a democratically elected Catholic integralist government. At the same time, liberalism's flaws become more and more evident with every passing day. Liberalism, even if it begins in its classical form, always ends up wanting more for itself. It expands beyond its original intent. And I think the post-liberals here in America, but also elsewhere, are correct on this point. They have diagnosed a particular weakness in the liberal idea. It is not content to stay classical. But I'm uncomfortable with the solutions. And whether it's the Islamist vision in the Middle East or the post-liberal vision that draws on nationalist and Christian influences here in America, I'm nervous about some of those proposals, in part because here in the US, as an American Muslim, I am a minority, and I do worry about what a theoretically Christian government might look like. At the same time, liberalism is not enough. Or to put it differently, we're not happy with liberalism. There's a really profound sense that something is fundamentally wrong. Epidemic of loneliness, mental illness, identity confusion. And as consumers, not just of products, but lifestyles, we have unlimited choice. But this way of living with unlimited choice is overwhelming. And this is sometimes referred to as the paradox of choice. It's sort of a be careful what you wish for situation. You don't want to have too much of what you think you want. So where does this leave us? Usually when I give talks, I try to end on a positive note. I try to offer something resembling a resolution. But this time I don't have one. And I find myself stuck in the in-between, seeing liberalism's faults, but not really being sure that there is a clear alternative, or if there is a clear alternative, one that genuinely rethinks modern assumptions about the state. I'm not sure we've really seen it yet, or at least we haven't seen it in a more fully fledged form. That doesn't mean that we can't dream of alternatives, and I think that is a positive thing, to think beyond what we currently have, to try to extend our political imagination. And we don't really know what we'll find.